Hello guys, I'm Sup. You can also call me Sai. Welcome back to another video. I know it's been a while since my last one. I have been trying to find some motivation to work on my art and also edit this video at the same time by myself. Uh, anyways, but I'm here now. Let's go. Today we're talking about lighting 101. I know it might seem complicated at first, but once you get the hang of the basics, it's actually pretty easy to apply to any artwork, no matter what medium you're going to use. Whether it's digital art or traditional art, or maybe you're just setting up a scene for your cinematography. So, yeah, lighting plays a key role in a lot of aspects. But, anyways, let's jump right into the topic. So, here we've got the spear. We're gonna take this object as an example for me to explain about a few terms regarding light and shadow. So let's start with highlight. This is the brightest spot on the sphere where the light hits directly. In our case, the light is coming from top right, so the highlight is right here. It's basically the shiniest part of the sphere. Next is light. This is the part of the sphere that's still getting a good amount of light, but it's not as intense as highlight. It's what helps the sphere look round and three-dimensional. All this part over here is filled with light. And next we've got halftone or midtone. Think of this as the in-between zone where the light is starting to fade out. It's like nice middle ground that makes the sphere look smoother. And next we've got form shadow. This is where we get into the shadows. The form shadow is the area that's turned away from the light completely. But it's not pitch black. It still shows the shape of the sphere and gives it some depth. I know we might later get confused with, the difference between form and cast shadow, right? We'll get there. So next up, we've got cast shadow. So basically, this is the shadow the sphere throws onto surface it's sitting on. Since our light is coming from top right direction, the cast shadow falls to the bottom left. This shadow grounds the sphere, like making it look like it's actually sitting on something. So now let's talk about difference between form shadow and cast shadow. So form shadow happens on the object. Like if you see form shadow, it's on the object itself, like the shadow curving around this sphere. Cast shadow though are shadows the object throws on something else, like the surface below it, like this ground over here. Next up is bounce light or reflected light, like the form shadow area over here. You'll notice there's a bit of light peeking in, like over here. See how it's not as dark as this part? Well, it's bounce light. Basically, light is bouncing off the surface below. For example, over here, light is bouncing off of this ground and reflecting onto this side of the sphere, softly lighting up the shadow side. It's a small detail, but trust me, bounce lights, ambient lights, rim lights, these sort of lights seems, not really needed. But when you include those in your illustrations, it really makes your artwork more interesting. We can see what I mean with the bounce light over here as well. As you can see, the ground is in green color over here. So the light is reflecting onto this green and falling on this side of the sphere. Next up, coming to the ambient light, it's a bit different. It's not coming from any one direction, like the other lights over here. It's just kind of everywhere. It's the light that fills the whole space and stops things from being totally dark. So basically, this is a type of light that fills the whole space. It's super soft and it helps keep the scene from feeling too harsh. So let's take a full-on illustration as an example for me to explain about ambient light. As you can see, this is a part of right illustration. You see how it's actually filled with the cast shadow coming from her face, right? But isn't it supposed to be as dark as the spear over here? Like cast shadow, isn't it supposed to be dark? No, because we're surrounded with ambient light, which makes the shadows a bit lighter and softer. In this scenario, the whole surrounding is filled with this greenish water and a lot of stuff going on around her surrounding. So there's no one particular source, directional source for this light, but it's just filled all around her. So you can make an illustration look more interesting by adding ambient light, sense of color that represents the surrounding of the character. In this case, we can include bluish tones or maybe greenish tones just to make the artwork look more interesting. That's it for basics. Now let me explain a few more stuff regarding lighting and how important is it in illustrations and how masters actually take use of it. How are their works actually popular based off their lighting? Like we've got Xinjian, we've got Dylan Cole, one of the concept artists for Avatar, and we've got Chang Wei Pen, who does a lot of white splash arts. These are all pretty amazing works. So how do these artists actually approach with lighting? If you observe Xinjian's artworks, he's always got that interesting bounce lights. Every single one of the illustrations that he's got have amazing bounce light. Over here, like you would probably leave that in dark, but he still included light over here, which definitely improves the form of this character, giving three-dimensional form to this, and also made it interesting by changing the color of the bounce light. Like, where is it even coming from, this sort of orange tone, right? It's what that makes the art more interesting and exciting to look at. Look at how he made the light bounce off of her shirt's color, creating this bounce light. So interesting. If you observe his characters, there's not really any sort of dark spots at all. Like whatever the dark spots you look at are just occlusion shadows. So by the way, occlusion shadows are a type of shadows where the light is completely absent. When I say absent, completely absent. It's pitch dark. So the spots where the light has no chance of getting through, those spots are occlusion shadows. And coming to Chang Wei Pen's artworks, or any other white splash art you could take, for example, they've got this really nice value control where you can see the character really differentiating itself from the background by playing with the light. As you can see over here, the character is all covered in shadow, but it's differentiating itself from the background because the background is pretty much lit up. And since this character is in shadow, should they just leave everything in dark? No, they include a lot of interesting stuff like bounce light, highlights, rim lights, reflective lights. You can see how those earrings are creating this sort of blue hint on her cheeks. Pretty interesting details we've got there. As we've mentioned highlights, I really forgot mentioning this point previously when I was explaining the basics of it. Highlights technically just depend on the material of the object as well. If you can see the metal material over here, it basically reflects a lot of light. So the highlights of it would be much more harsh. Let's take this fabric over here. If the material is pretty much matte or, just a cotton-based material, for example, there's probably not going to be much of highlights. But in this case, I believe this fabric is made of silk or something. So coming up next, we've got Dylan Cole's artworks. I brought up these references not just to explain about interesting lights, interesting colorful lights that you've included in his concept art. So since we've understood everything about lighting so far, I'll try to explain it much further by taking my own illustration as an example. It's an illustration that I've created just for this tutorial. It's not gonna be any time-lapse process, but I'll turn on and off different layers and show how I included different types of shadows and lights. So let's see how lighting really changes the whole quality of the illustration. This is without lighting. How boring does that look? Very basic. Like nothing interesting at all. It's literally just filled up with midtones or halftones. We've got lightest midtone over here and darkest midtone over here. Now let's slowly add types of shadows and lights one after the other. Let's see how interesting this illustration slowly gets. So here I've added cast shadows. You can see how interesting the illustration got already with just the cast shadows. Since the light source is top right, it casts a shadow in these places. And coming up next, we've got light. I didn't really include a separate layer for form shadows. I just created form shadows with just the lighting. How did I do that? By just avoiding to include light in the spot where I usually include form shadows. And next up, we've got ambient light. Since the surrounding or the room itself is filled with bluish tones, to make illustration look more interesting, I've included tones of blue at few spots of this character. Next up, I added a rim light. So since I didn't really explain what rim light is in the basics part of this video, rim light is just thin and glowing edge of light you see in the opposite side of the object. In this case, light is falling on this direction, but there could be a second source of light. To just make this illustration more interesting, in the shadow side of the character, we could include rim light, which is just thin glowing edge that you see over here. It happens when light wraps around the object from behind or the side. The often mistake that most of them do with the rim light is by making it so obvious and even all around the character or any object. Like, you can make it look more interesting by creating uneven shapes instead of following through with one singular line. So the next layer is just me making a few subtle changes. I felt like his face is looking a bit desaturated. Blood usually flushes through the sensitive parts of this face. For example, upper part of this nose or just the cheek area where you can see a lot of blood underneath. I included a bit of redness to his skin there. And finally, I've included highlights. Look at how it made the whole illustration pop. That's the magic of highlights. Never ignore highlights, guys. As far as you have the chance to include highlights, just throw them. Just throw them in there. Unless they're extremely matte surfaced, boring ass objects, always include highlights. You can see how I've included highlights over here, over here. So yeah, these are the stuff that would make your artwork look more interesting. Let's get into a bit more details regarding the lighting. Mastering light is not just about light and shadow. It's all about understanding what source of light brings different moods for the illustration. As we can see here, the well-known popular source of light to show the evilish or demonic side of the character. You know, just pull out torchlight and just turn it out, just put it under your face, and voila, you just turn into a ghost. And you can just scare people by walking around in the dark with the light source falling on to the bottom of your face. And it's got pretty basic light source over here as well. This is just pretty bunch of references that I've gathered on Pinterest just to explain on how the source of light affects the mood of the illustration. And other important thing is, when it comes to lighting and shadows, it's always important to follow the planes of the object. In this case, we here have the planes of the face. Following the planes of the face when you're implementing light and shadows would make the illustration more interesting. And type of light also define the mood of the illustration. Like, if you see this scenario over here, it's pretty much bloomed sort of lighting. It looks very celestial. As soon as you look at this person over here, all you can think is she's probably one celestial angel, you know? Why do we think that? It's because of this celestial type of lighting. And over here, we can see how they sneaked up major interesting part of this photograph in shadow, and even only this part in light. This kind of brought that sneaky vibes to the scenario where she's probably hiding behind a wall or peeping through and trying to be as suspicious and sneaky as possible. And how did they bring that? Do you think it's because of the expression? No, it's because of the way they played around with this light and shadow. And over here, take a wild guess of what am I going to explain about these reference pictures. Well, it's about color. Yep. As you can see, even the color of the light defines the mood of the scenario. Let's take this hallway, for example. As you can see, the green light is really bringing out that alien, creepy, underground vibes to it, right? But as soon as I change it into different color, the whole vibes of the situation changes. You can pull out another reference over here. As you can see, it looks so evil and dark, gore, because of this goofy ass red light that pops up from this door. It's not peaceful at all, right? When you look at it, it just reminds you of some slaughterhouse or some gore, bloody scene, right? Look at it right when I change the color of this light source. You see how the bloody aspect of the situation is changed completely just by changing the color of the light? Yeah, color of the light really sets up the mood for the illustration as well. So yeah, so we covered up the important gist of this whole concept of lighting. If you follow these simple stuff that you've learned in today's video, it's gonna help you make the illustration more and more interesting and exciting. Thank you for watching this video, guys. Please hit the subscribe button and like button if you like this video, and don't forget to share it with your artist friends. Alright guys, bye bye. Have a nice week ahead.